All right, so if you guys remember, a couple weeks ago, there was that massive explosion at the Kabul airport where an ISIS suicide bomber basically blew themselves up and killed 13 U.S. service members and about 170 innocent Afghan civilians. Horrific strike, terrible top to bottom, and basically in response to this, as the U.S. was continuing the evacuation process at the Kabul airport, they set themselves on high alert and they were expecting more subsequent attacks to be potentially imminent. And so, as they were on high alert, one of the drone strike targets that they decided to obliterate was what they called at the time potential ISIS suicide bombers on the outskirts of the city in Kabul near the airport. And they told everybody that these were ISIS-K fighters, that they did have explosives in their car when the drone strike happened. And even if there were innocent civilians who were killed in the process, those innocent civilians were likely killed by the secondary explosive devices that were within the car itself. Now, we have a new piece by the New York Times, which basically did a massive investigative reporting job here, which they did a fantastic job on, where they basically explore all of the details by going and interviewing people on the ground there, in addition to collecting security camera footage and getting a picture of what that day looked like for the actual drone strike victim, who we now know was not an ISIS-K fighter, and that not only were the 9 other innocent civilians that were killed were innocent, but the guy who they were claiming was a potential ISIS-K suicide bomber was actually innocent as well, and was in fact a U.S. aid worker. So this is the guy who was actually killed along with 9 members of his family. His name is Zamari Ahmad, and he was killed in this drone strike, again, with 7 children, as well as a couple other people who were around the car at the time of the attack. So just to give you guys a reminder of what exactly they were talking about in the wake of this attack, they were telling us stuff like this, right? So here from Reuters, about a day after the attack happened. So U.S. drone strike destroys Islamic State car bomb in Kabul, officials say. So all of these officials were coming out, right? General Mark Milley, all of the other commanders, all of the other intelligence officials, even Joe Biden himself were coming out. General Mark Milley literally called this a righteous strike, right? Okay, so this is what they were telling us. They were telling us it was Islamic State suicide bombers who were in this car planning an imminent attack, and the U.S. had no choice in the matter other than to righteously strike this car and obliterate anybody within the vicinity because, well, they had their hands tied. What were they going to do? Those suicide bombers were going to go blow themselves up and potentially kill more people at the airport, right? So they were playing on people and basically lying straight up to people. So I want to give you some of the details as to what actually happened in this circumstance, and it just gives you a perspective not just in how brazenly they were willing to lie about this specific attack, but in addition, it's just emblematic of what the entire war looked like, right? We never had a cohesive plan. Our intelligence was faulty the entire 20 years of the war, and this is what we were really doing as we were claiming that we were fighting the terrorists. So U.S. drone strike mistakenly targeted Afghan aid worker, investigation finds. So Zamari Ahmadi, who died alongside 9 others, had no connection to terrorism, a New York Times investigation suggested. So here are some of the details that we now know. The U.S. mistakenly targeted and killed an innocent aid worker for an American company in a drone strike in Afghanistan, the New York Times suggested in an investigation into the country's final military action of the recently concluded war. Now, one of the main reasons I'm making this video, in addition to just talking about how they got this intelligence wrong and lied to the American people yet again, is that this is not actually going to be the final military action that we are taking in Afghanistan. In fact, Joe Biden has repeatedly said that we are going to be maintaining our over-the-horizon capabilities, which means we are going to be continuing these very same drone strikes, likely, that killed these innocent civilians. So that's why it's important to discuss this, because this is what the future of the U.S. war in Afghanistan is going to be looking like, even if we don't have boots-on-the-ground troops there. So they continue saying that the victim, the newspaper said, was 43-year-old Zamari Ahmadi, who died with 9 members of his family, including 7 children, when a Hellfire missile from a U.S. Air Force Reaper drone struck his car as he arrived home from work in a residential neighborhood of Kabul. And U.S. military officials have insisted the targets of the 29th August operation were Islamic State suicide bombers planning an attack on the Kabul airport similar to the one which again killed 13 American troops, helping with evacuation and more than 170 others 3 days earlier. So the action, General Mark Milley, chair of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, insisted, again, was a righteous strike against ISIS-K members who had been observed at points during the day loading what surveillance teams thought to be explosives into the vehicle and visiting a known safe house for the terrorist group. So neither of these were true. The safe house for the terrorist group that they're talking about here was actually his own office, and these supposed explosive devices that they saw them loading into the car were water jugs that he was bringing from the office back to his home, to his family and community, because they were having a water shortage. So they got the intelligence completely wrong and killed all of these people for essentially no reason whatsoever. So they continue saying, but according to the Times reporting, compiled from extensive video analysis, interviews with his colleagues and family, and visits to the scene, cast considerable and potentially devastating doubt on that U.S. official version of events, and what the U.S. military observers figured was Ahmadi acting suspiciously, the newspaper said, was him actually going about his normal business as a worker for the California-based aid group Nutrition and Educational International, and his duties that day included dropping off colleagues at various places in Kabul, according to the director from NEI in Afghanistan, interviewed by the Times reporter. And the explosives that were found in the vehicle were water cartons that Ahmadi filled from a hose at his office and was taking home to his family. And they say, quote, "We have nothing to do with terrorism or ISIS. We love America. We want to go there," said the director, who was quoted anonymously, obviously because of the danger of being associated with a U.S. company. And the Washington Post also published its own investigation into the deadly U.S. strike, which reached a similar conclusion, including that there was no indication of a second larger explosion at the residential compound that Milley suggested was evidence of explosives in the back of Ahmadi's car. So, yet again, completely lied top to bottom. I mean, the extent that they went to lie about every single facet of this, right? They said, well, we don't think that there were any suspected or we don't think there were any suspected innocent civilians that were casualties in this strike. They said, we know that this was a potential ISIS suicide bomber that was planning an imminent attack at the Kabul airport. Both of those were lies. Now we find out that there were 10 innocent civilians that were killed in this strike, and where are going to be the consequences for this? I mean, this is a straight up war crime if there ever was going to be one. You can't just turn around and say, oh, well, we had intelligence that suggested it. No, your intelligence was obviously fucking wrong, and you killed 10 innocent people in this strike. 0 members of ISIS-K were killed in this strike. They didn't get anybody that they were actually trying to target. So it's not even like, oh, we were actually targeting, the right people and some innocent civilians happened to get caught up in the process, which isn't an excuse in and of itself. But no, not only did you not have a 100% kill rate for ISIS-K members, you had a 100% kill rate for innocent civilians. So it's completely unacceptable. But in addition to that, you have Mark Milley, one of these top generals, just going around lying about it and just saying, oh, well, we had intelligence and we know that there were secondary explosions and that went off because there were bombs in his car. There were no bombs in his car. There was cartons of water that were in his car. And the children that were outside the vehicle, which apparently the U.S. Drone operators didn't see, but the children that were outside at the vehicle were members of his own family who were running home to greet him as he had just gotten home from his day at work. So he's just a complete normal guy who's trying to serve the interests of his community, and the U.S. drone strikes him into oblivion and then goes out and lies to the American people, as they have been lying to the American people throughout the entire course of this 20-year pointless war, which has been completely filled with war crimes top to bottom. Every single president that has continued this war, from George W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, is guilty of these types of war crimes. So there's not going to be any accountability. But if we actually had justice and accountability in this country, then everybody, top to bottom, who was involved in this drone strike would be held accountable for those 10 murders, because that's exactly what they are. They are murders. And the other reason why it's important to discuss these things, to understand how wrong they can be while being so confidently wrong, is that this is what they're planning to continue doing, right? So again, even though that Guardian article said that was the last military operation in Afghanistan by the U.S., this is what the U.S. military is saying. So Mark Milley, the same guy who just lied about who they were killing in that ISIS-K strike, Milley says it's possible the U.S. will work with the Taliban to thwart ISIS-K. Obviously, when they say to thwart ISIS-K, that means apparently killing 100% innocent civilians. So don't take them at their words when they say, oh, don't look at this, the media is going to be continuing to get obviously quieter and quieter as people lose interest in Afghanistan, but this is what they're planning to continue. They are planning to continue, the boots on the ground presence was terrible and horrific, but the worse and more deadly aspect of this war is this. It is the drone strikes. It is the airstrikes, because they pretend like they're precise. I mean, some of these generals will literally go out there and try to convince people that we could, drone strike the tip of a pen from 100 yards in the sky, or from a couple miles in the sky. It's complete bullshit, okay? They're not accurate, and not only are the drone strikes themselves not accurate, obviously, if you killed 10 people that you didn't even know were there in the vicinity, but in addition to that, your intelligence obviously is not accurate, and it's probably going to get worse if you're deciding you're going to be working with the Taliban, and just, even though the Taliban is actually fighting ISIS in Afghanistan, I mean, this is not going to be pretty, right? They're not actually going to be conducting airstrikes 100% 100% against ISIS-K members. It's pretty clear what they're actually going to be doing. They're going to be bombing anybody that they feel like bombing in Afghanistan. So it's important that we keep an eye on this, because this is what the war in Afghanistan is actually going to continue to look like. And it's not just in Afghanistan, it's in Syria, it's in Iraq, it's all over, it's in Somalia, where the US is conducting these drone strikes. They come out and they say, and they act confident, and they pretend like they know exactly who they are conducting these strikes again. And then because of investigative reports like from the New York Times, I mean, if we didn't have this type of shit, then we wouldn't have the evidence to prove that they were lying. But they are perfectly willing to go out there and bald-faced confidently lie to the American people. So we got to keep a close eye on this and continue to be critical of this, because this is exactly what is going to be continuing under Joe Biden's watch in Afghanistan.